Welcome to Planet-wide SOS Hackathon. This is our second day opening ceremony, and today we have a special guest. We have Vitalik Buterin, and we will have 1 hour later, we'll have another special guest, Ben Goertzel. Our main keynotes for today, Vitalik will be presenting us the decentralized digital organizations and how to build them on Ethereum. Our hackathon is also forming a decentralized digital organization through which we're going to be voting to pick our winners at the hackathon on June 30th. So this is going to be a very great learning experience for us. And please prepare your questions. We have people here on Zoom who have their own questions, prepare their own questions. We will have them ask the questions at the end of the presentation. People who are watching us through YouTube, through CryptoChick's website, and through Decentralized, you can go to https://SOS-hack-live. And there is a chat there. You can also ask your question through this chat, but our team will be vetting the questions and just picking the interesting ones. Please do so, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I would like to present Vitalik for you. Vitalik, inventor of Ethereum with digital organizations presentation. Thank you. Vitalik, it's all yours.
Okay, yay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, and actually well?
Very well.
Okay, great. No, because when I presented about a few weeks ago, a whole bunch of people yelled at me for having a bad microphone, and so I bought a better one. So I guess glad it paid off. Okay, so I guess today what I wanted to kind of go through is just kind of this general concept of kind of digital communities, and what is a digital community, and how can blockchains help people who are part of communities who are trying to kind of build and maintain communities, and basically how can kind of Ethereum and things built on top of Ethereum just be useful tools to different groups of people who wants to collaborate. So to start off, hold on, I will just get my presentation out. There it is, share. Okay, can you see it?
Yes,
okay.
We can see it, yes.
Okay, great. So to start off, I guess, what makes a community in general, right? So, there's different kinds of communities. So like you have local communities, like a city is a community, a country is a community, a region is a community, even a district in a city can be a community. You can have communities that are around specific projects. So like, for example, there is the Ethereum community, there's the Bitcoin community, there's the community of users of some particular kind of product or system. Community is around people who speak a particular language. There's communities around specific interests. So there is the community of people who are interested in technology, cryptography, health, economics, science, and creating fictional languages, just about every kind of thing that someone might be interested in. Like, one of the really beautiful things of the internet is that there's probably a community for it, right? So there's communities of many different types, kind of both online and offline. Communities that are online often do a lot of very different kinds of things. So basically the question is kind of, how can all of these communities just work together more effectively? So, what makes a community in general, right? So, you have often people who have shared experiences, people who do things together, people who have common interests, who are interested in the same kinds of topics, who have similar values, people who have common goals, and also, it's not just the kind of what people are interested in that binds them together. It's also the things that they are kind of concretely doing, right? So there's kind of common goals in terms of kind of what you want to do in the world in general, and then there's much more specific things of like, we are trying to do this very specific thing right now. You know, we are trying to launch Ethereum 2.0. We are trying to have a hackathon. We are trying to help treat some particular disease. There's, you can kind of go from a very abstract goals to very specific projects. And then you finally have commonly managed resources. So commonly managed resources could be even just financial resources. They could be a forum that people in the community use to talk to each other. It could be a lot of things. So the question next is kind of what kinds of tools are needed to actually have all of these things that make up a community, right? So, I mean, first of all, communities existed long before technology existed. And even communities around common interests existed long before a lot of the things that we call technology today existed. You know, you don't need computers to have shared experiences. You don't need the internet to have common interests. But at the same time, you do need to have some kind of communication, right? So you can have in-person communication. Communication can get a bit better if you have, let's say, the ability to write things that lots of people can read. It gets even better if you have radios. It gets even better if you do have the internet. But ultimately, at this point, what you do need is just communication. Now, common goals. Goals often require the last thing, which is resources. And resources are tricky, right? Because when you have kind of commonly managed resources, then you need this thing that we call governance, right? You need basically a way of managing those resources, a way of kind of ultimately deciding where those resources end up going towards. And governance is often a type of communication, but it's a particular kind of communication, and it's kind of more complex, and it has a lot of structure that kind of simpler forms of communication do not have, right? So one particular kind of important piece of a kind of difference between a lot of governance and a lot of other communications is this concept of shared state, right? This concept that there is some kind of information that we all need to agree on, right? Whether that's what decision did we just make, who is this resource ultimately going to go to, how will this resource be used? And communication is typically not state, right? Like, not everyone needs to agree on like what was said and in what order we said things. You just need messages to get through. But sometimes there is state. Sometimes there is things that we all need to agree on. Things like, you know, how did we all vote? How did some particular decision get made? What was the result? You need to be able to agree on things that you can't go back on. Or if you can go back on them, then you can only go back on them through some kind of process that you already agreed on. So there's many different kinds of shared state. So who has how much of some given token? So community currencies have existed for a long time. And if you have a currency, you need some way of determining, well, who has how much of that currency at some point in time? Who has some position in a governance system? If you have governance, whether that's something as big as governance over a company or a country, or whether it's just who's the moderator in a forum, you know, you need to record the information of kind of who has those positions. Who has some username. So if the community has its own kind of naming system, then you know that needs to be managed somehow, and you need to kind of store, well, who actually is actually does get called by some name. And on the internet, where it's kind of you especially wants to be sure that you don't have kind of 10 different people with the same name, then this becomes even more important. Even more boring and kind of technical things like what cryptographic key is used to verify someone's messages. Like, what cryptographic key do you use to verify that a message that claims to come from me actually does come from me? So these are all things that blockchains do, right? So who has how much of some given token? Bitcoin's been doing that since 2009. Who has some username? That's decentralized DNS. Namecoin's been doing that since 2010. What cryptographic key is used to verify someone's messages? Well, being a currency kind of involves that already, or you can think about things like smart contract wallets where you can change the signing key, and we've had that for a couple of years. Who has some position in a governance system? So decentralized organizations, DAOs, we've had that for years. So these are all examples of things that blockchains are good at keeping track of. So now, what kind of state might communities have, right? So we kind of flip the question from kind of what are we providing to what do communities need? And the general way that we can split things up is thinking about kind of internal and external, right? So internal is usually kind of some notion of like degree of membership in a community. So to what extent is someone a member in a community? What kind of status does someone have inside of a community? And when there's not that much at stake, then a lot of the time this can be very informal, and you can kind of know, this person is part of this community, this person is part of that community, and it doesn't need to be kind of defined very strictly. But when you want a kind of community to have governance over some resources, then you do need to formalize more, right? And so you do need to kind of decide, who is a member, who is not a member, right? This is kind of the thing that Eleanor Ostrom talked about in her kind of writing on on the commons and kind of common pool resources. That one of her kind of major recommendations is that you do need to agree on a system that basically says kind of who is part of the community that controls these resources with these rules, who isn't. And we can make that kind of less binary and talk about not just are you a member or not, we can talk about degree of membership. Internal currency and token, right? So one kind of very imperfect, but still a real kind of way of measuring, to what extent are you part of the Ethereum community might be, how much Ether do you have? And there's a lot of ways to participate in the Ethereum community without having any Ether, and then there's people who have a lot and who barely participate at all. But kind of taking everything together, it is kind of one signal among many, right? And if cryptocurrency communities in general, and if especially once you start kind of going down the list and you go down to kind of the smaller cryptocurrency communities where you have like hundreds of them, then like which tokens you have is kind of a measurement of like which ones you're part of. Binary, are you a member or not? There could be just a list of members, and are you one of the members or are you not? You can give special recognition, so awards, honors, status symbols, and you can have things that are more complicated, right? So there's a lot of different kind of ways to try to formalize a degree of membership. And formalizing is always hard because no matter what formalism you have, your formalism is always going to miss a lot of very important things. And so it's often a good idea to have many kinds of overlapping formalisms and not just one. But formalizing to some extent often is necessary because you do want to ultimately kind of make some decision that you kind of output that decision to the outside world. Resources. So this is kind of things created by the outside that a community has control over. Money is a resource. A discussion forum is a resource. The ability to moderate that discussion forum is one kind of governance. Participation in outside governance processes. So a community could participate in governance processes in other communities. So countries might participate in the United Nations. And a lot of countries are kind of internally organized in a way where it's kind of cities and states that are kind of the smaller unit that then go and participate. There's sometimes like companies have shares in other companies. And potentially you could even imagine other kinds of kind of communities formalizing and having a kind of participation in some other kind of governance. So why decentralize these things, right? So why try doing any of these things on a kind of decentralized substrate? Like, why do we care about doing these things on blockchains or using decentralized communication? Why not just do everything on like one of the existing centralized platforms? One answer is to kind of reduce dependence on centralized companies. And a kind of related reason is to kind of increase the ease of community coordinated exit if those companies misbehave, right? So if you have a community that lives on Reddit, then Reddit becomes evil, then, you know, you can move over to some other platform. You know, you can move over onto like Twitter, Facebook, Vote, like whatever, you know, something new that someone comes up with, potentially just build your own platform, even just fork Reddit. So if the companies misbehave, then a community could potentially kind of exit from being on that platform to being on another platform. And this is easier, or it's significantly easier, if the kind of state information that the community has, so any of its resources, its kind of information about who is a member to what extent, about kind of how much has everyone done, how much has everyone earned, if that information doesn't just sit on some centralized database, if it's somewhere decentralized where it's not dependent on one company and you can just move it over. You don't necessarily need full decentralization. So even kind of examples of partial decentralization can be valuable. So example, right? So Reddit community points. So Reddit recently released this community points system where so far they've done it on a test net for a couple of subreddits, but basically the idea is you have blockchain-based tokens that represent your degree of membership in a community. And Reddit, the way that they kind of advertise this is interesting, right? So like if you go to like the website, it's reddit.com/community-points, and you kind of click through their intro, right? The way that the intro kind of talks about it is like, originally, you know, you had the internet, and the internet is this kind of free and open terrain where anyone could participate. And then the internet got dominated by corporations, and now kind of let's take it back and let's create a more decentralized approach. And one of the kind of philosophical shifts that I've noticed between kind of this and how people might talk, you know, 10 or 15 years ago is basically that kind of 10 or 15 years ago, you know, there was more kind of emphasis on the internet kind of being more flat, right? So everyone has their own blog, and blogs can kind of talk to each other, but there's kind of no structure kind of higher than that, right? Like basically, you know, everyone is free, everyone is equal, kind of everything is kind of on the same plane in some sense. And here we're seeing Reddit kind of pushing a somewhat different vision, right? Basically, the vision is less of a kind of the world being flat and more of a kind of archipelago, right? More of this kind of set of different communities where inside of those communities you have rules, and some of those rules might be good, some of those rules might be bad, but you know, you have the ability to exit, you have the ability to join, you have the ability to kind of choose which communities and which sets of rules you're participating in to what extent. And even kind of communities themselves as a unit have rights, right? So a community has the right to exit a platform and move to a different platform. Communities could potentially kind of have tools that help them kind of have different kinds of governance. Communities could merge with other communities, and they can't yet in this system, but you can totally imagine that they could in the future. Communities could fork. So if you have a community where it's all of these pieces of information about kind of who has how many coins, who has what governance rights, all on the blockchain, then forking a community and kind of starting a new one potentially becomes even easier as well. And so here, right, they're basically trying to use these community points for kind of a set of different purposes, right? So first of all, let's kind of the function of these points is to kind of determine your degree of membership, right? The more you participate in a community, the more you're a member, which makes sense. And why do we want to determine degree of membership? I mean, so one is to kind of determine credibility in a conversation, right? So if you're in a conversation on Reddit and someone makes a post, then you get to see, you know, is this person actually part of this community, or is this person kind of just someone coming from the outside who isn't really part of this kind of context and doesn't have aligned interests and all of these things. And this is potentially very valuable, right? So like, for example, and for those of us who were around in 2016, 2017, where you had the kind of the block size wars in Bitcoin and the DAO fork war kind of on Ethereum. There's a lot of people kind of saying things like, oh, the people that support my viewpoints are really part of this community. The people that support the other viewpoints are just trolls coming from the outside to undermine us, and all of these kind of things that they say that almost kind of reflects the things that kind of politicians yell about and about kind of accusing their opponents of being supported by foreign interference and all of these things, right? So, if it happens on kind of larger scales and smaller scales. And so if you have kind of better ways of determining, is someone kind of part of this community to a large extent? Are they part of the community to a smaller extent? Like you could see that being useful. And then aside from kind of conversations, there's also governance processes, right? And governance is this kind of big thing where that contains a lot of different concepts and kind of mixes a lot of concepts together. So you could have governance for decision making. So like the thing that they don't do yet, and that I think they should do, is they should basically just allow kind of some kind of DAO, some kind of smart contract system to actually directly kind of control even just the ability to moderate a subreddit. The thing they do now is kind of smaller and more modest. Like basically you have polls, and the polls can be weighted not just by people, but also by kind of community points of a particular community. And so you can actually see kind of who has a particular opinion on something. Like, is a particular opinion supported by people who actually are part of this community and have been for a long time? Is it supported by just kind of people who are kind of on the fringes and only pop in occasionally? And this is something that even in the Ethereum community itself, like we've often asked for, right? So like we've often, when we've had kind of controversial governance decisions, for example, when we've had kind of questions of, do we reduce issuance to miners from 5 to 3? Do we fork the DAO? Do we rescue the parity multisig wallet? Do we implement ProcPow? Like all of these things. Like one of the big complaints has been that there isn't really a good way of kind of gathering sentiment, because like on the internet, you don't really know where the boundaries are, right? You don't really know whether some proposal is actually really supported by the Ethereum community, or is it supported by like a small number of very wealthy participants and everyone else opposes it, or is it supported by a large number of kind of Bitcoin people, and Bitcoin people sometimes have different priorities than Ethereum people, in terms of like proof of work versus proof of stake and a lot of other questions. So this potential, even just polls and just kind of signaling is often a very valuable kind of input to governance as well, right? And if we can make better signals, then you can have better inputs to governance, and you can have better governance. So points also get used for rewarding good contributions, right? So here you have memberships, and basically, like if here, you can use community points to get a special membership in that subreddit. Memberships gives you access to premium features, badges, animated emojis, GIFs. So you basically have the ability to get these kinds of status symbols. And this isn't the only thing you can do. There's also other kind of things that you can buy that kind of show that you are a dedicated participant in this particular community. So reward good contributions with both status and potentially kind of points that you can trade, and value capture, right? So basically, points can be used because they're used as this kind of currency that you can use to purchase things. The community basically has the ability to kind of capture value, basically capture kind of economic resources from its participants that it can then direct to public goods that are relevant to that community. So there's different kinds of governance, right? So a lot of the time when people talk about DAOs, they talk about DAOs that have coins, right? So even the original DAO, you had a smart contract and you had coins, and if you have coins, you can vote. If you have more coins, twice as many coins, you can vote twice as much. And this is how the DAO worked. This is how something like delegated proof of stake in a lot of blockchains works. And membership is kind of fully transferable and permissionless, right? So this is what I call kind of more money-like governance. So you can have modes of governance that kind of look more like money and feel more like they basically are just using money for things. And then you have governance that kind of is more one person, one vote, right? And one person, one vote is more egalitarian. It's less vulnerable to plutocracy. But one of the weaknesses is that it's more binary, right? And it ignores kind of gradations or kind of different degrees of preference and different degrees of membership. It has no way of saying that, oh, 5 people want thing A and 1 person wants thing B, but the 1 person's kind of need is actually 100 times more important than the 5 other people's need. So, if you're deciding whether to build a building, then, who should have more say? The person who owns the land in that particular building, or people who are living like 40 kilometers away and can barely see it on the horizon. So, gradations of kind of preference are very important, and kind of degree of membership in a community is very important. And one person, one vote systems tends to kind of not do a very good job here, because they just say, either you have say and everyone who has say has the same amount of say, or you do not have say and everyone who doesn't have say has no say at all. But if things that are more money-like, they're more flexible, but they can be more vulnerable to kind of being controlled by a small group, as we have actually seen in a lot of kind of coin voting polls that we've had, right? So I've written several articles on this, like on Vitalik.ca. There's kind of notes on blockchain governance, and there's a couple of others. And there's examples of how these coin votes just always get basically dominated by a very small number of people. So, what if there's something in the middle that's the ideal? And so this is where quadratic funding comes in, right? So quadratic funding is this kind of idea that I came up with Glenn, and we've been pushing quite a lot. And the idea behind quadratic funding is it's this mechanism for kind of funding public goods, and especially determining which public goods should be funded, right? So a public good basically just means like any kind of project which is valuable to a large number of people, and where you can't kind of control in a fine-grained way who gets the benefit and who can't, right? So like apples, not really a public good, because you can just give some people apples and not give other people apples. But like clean air, for example, definitely a public good. You can't kind of give clean air to half the city and dirty air to the other half of the city, because, well, air just doesn't work that way. There's lots of public goods, and on the internet, there's even more public goods than there are in physical space, right? Because on the internet, like most activities that people do are public in some form. If you write a comment, lots of people read it. If you write a piece of code, lots of people use it, and everyone has the ability to use it. So, like, especially in information space, more things are public than are private. And so the idea here, though, is that you still want to identify kind of what public goods are really worth supporting and what public goods are not, right? There's some projects that are really useful to a lot of people, and there's some projects that just aren't useful to people. So the idea here is this, right? So individuals have the ability to contribute. They have the ability to make donations. And kind of on this diagram on the left, you can see kind of each contribution as being kind of represented by a square, right? So the area of the square represents kind of how much money they contributed. And the total green area along the diagonal is kind of how much money everyone contributed together. If multiple individuals contribute to the same project, so that then basically the mechanism kind of detects that, hey, this is a public good. It's a good that's benefiting multiple people. And so they get a subsidy that basically compensates for the kind of tragedy of the commons effect, which is why regular donations usually don't lead to kind of enough money going to these public projects. And so here, and you can see, and you have the yellow parts that are off the diagonal. And so they basically so each of the green squares is a contribution. The length of a green square, or the width of a green square, is the square root of a contribution. You add up all the square roots and you square that, and you get this kind of big square. And all of these yellow bits, these kind of extra rectangles, those are all basically subsidies. right? And there's some clever math that basically proves that in some mathematical sense, this is kind of the optimal subsidy to provide, right? And the subsidy can often be quite large. So we've done a kind of live tests of this, and a $1 donation often gets matched by kind of over $200. So Gitcoin grants, so we've been doing Gitcoin grants kind of quadratic funding for about 5 rounds now. And it's actually been kind of really interesting and really effective at kind of funding projects that the Ethereum community needs. So there's kind of tech projects, there's media projects, and there's a lot of projects that people find really valuable that weren't being funded well before that do end up getting supported by Gitcoin grants. And it's actually been working, in my opinion, quite well for us. So challenges, right? So first of all, like quadratic funding isn't magic. And the main way in which it's not magic is that this subsidy, right? Like these kind of extra yellow squares that join up with the green squares still has to come from somewhere. And so like there's 2 problems in funding public goods, right? One problem is how to actually get the resources to fund them, right? Because you have a tragedy of the commons, and so people aren't going to just donate by themselves. But the other problem is to choose how to determine which public goods are actually worth supporting. And quadratic funding solves the second problem, and it solves only a little bit of the first. So the rest of the money, the subsidy, the rest of the solution to the first problem still has to come from somewhere, right? And there's this kind of one sentence viewpoint that Glenn promotes that I like to call neo-Georgism, which is basically kind of tax the congestible, subsidize the public goods, right? So when you have a community, then you're often going to have projects where you have positive externalities. So where one person getting something also means that other people are more likely to get it, right? So if I read a comment that you write and that comment is really insightful and valuable, then that comment is in a public forum and lots of other people will read it too. If I see a piece of code that's been written by someone else, then you're also going to see that piece of code and you can also download it, right? So when you have things that have these kind of increasing returns, so if I have something, you're more likely to also have that thing, then and if economic reasoning says that that's something that needs to be subsidized. But then there's also resources that are more kind of what I call congestible, right? So resources where if I have something, that makes it less valuable for everyone else. So in a city, roads are congestible. The more people are driving on a road, the less fun the road is to drive on. Pollution, a perfect example of congestion. And in kind of internet communities, and social status is one of those things that's also congestible, right? So like the more people have a badge, the less valuable that badge is. The more people have a certain kind of recognition, the less valuable it is. So there are things that people value because they're unique. And the idea here is basically that you kind of use these unique things and you kind of auction them off, or you provide them to people who are contributing. And so you basically kind of take that revenue from those kind of congestible things and you kind of push it over to public goods, to things that have these increasing returns, right? So you kind of take resources out of the decreasing returns and you move them into the increasing returns. And basically, this is how you kind of supercharge your local community's economy. So what do we have for congestible things? Well, Reddit community points is basically kind of using social status as one place to start, but there's potentially a lot of other things as well, right? I mean, even like sponsorships at conferences and a lot, I mean, even just the kind of tickets to conferences a lot of the time can be an example of this. There's kind of a lot of physical products, a lot of kind of one-to-one services. So a lot of congestible things and a lot of public goods. And if you can kind of match them up with each other, then you have something great. Another challenge. So in any system that's kind of not money-like and it's more like one person, one vote, you need to prevent people from getting more than one account, right? You need to prevent one person with 10,000 times more resources from pretending to be 10,000 people. And in very large-scale contexts, this is very tricky, right? Kind of verifying identity is tricky. There's a lot of ways to defraud it. It gets very complicated. In smaller scale contexts, it's easier, right? So there's this wonderful project called POPE, the Proof of Attendance Protocol, that basically kind of gives you a token if you personally attend some particular event. And that's one way of measuring participation in a community. And there's potentially other things as well. Another problem, I need to prevent collusion. I need to prevent people from kind of buying votes, right? So see the recent kind of fiasco that we saw with Steam and Tron, where basically kind of, you had pretty much I think it was Justin going to just basically using coins that were on exchanges to vote for kind of a proposal on Steam that went against something that the community wanted. And so basically people, by just putting their coins on an exchange, were kind of giving over their governance power to someone else. And you might think, well, isn't that reasonable? Like, isn't it okay to be able to kind of buy and sell governance power? And it turns out that, like basically, if you want to have the benefits of governance that's not money-like, then like there's some economic reasons why it's not, right? You have to kind of restrict people's ability to just kind of trade around their governance power to the highest bidder. And this is challenging, right? You have to force people to kind of hold their own keys. You need to do some cryptographic work to make voting kind of unprovable. But this is work that there's a lot of progress that's being made on. So there's a lot of kind of different governance mechanisms that you can have, right? So like you can have simple votes, you can have quadratic votes, you can have quadratic funding, you can have kind of DAOs with different rules for membership. So like I should probably mention Moloch DAO as well, where Moloch DAO is kind of, it's a DAO and it has DAO tokens, but there's more kind of restrictions around who can participate. To be like you have to be accepted. So it's like there's ways to design DAOs that are not money-like, and there's like basically there's this entire kind of very wide space of kind of governance mechanisms, and different governance mechanisms work well in different situations. And this is something that we should be doing kind of a lot more experimenting and exploring with, right? So, we have online communities, we're doing a lot of online things. How do those online things end up getting governed, and how do decisions end up getting made? It's a difficult question. And I think for the future and kind of in the next few decades, this is going to become more and more important, right? So more of our activity is moving online. So this recent kind of pandemic has really, I think, accelerated a lot of pre-existing trends, and it's made a lot of people just realize just how much you can do in a kind of purely online way. And so more and more of our communities are becoming global, more of our activity is becoming online. And so far, we've basically, I think, only really scratched the surface of how these communities can organize, right? So there's a lot of different ways in which these communities can organize, and it's really important to do this experimenting. And we've seen, like, for example, even with cryptocurrencies themselves, with the DAO, with Moloch DAO, with Gitcoin grants, with kind of DAOs at conferences and DAOs at hackathons, a lot of different experiments, and we should have more experiments, and we should see where these experiments end up leading us. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Vitalik. That was very excellent presentation. I learned a lot. Can you please just answer me one question? Do you have any preference? You mentioned a lot of types of DAOs that can exist. Do you have any preference yourself, your personal preference, like with the, let's say something with the quadratic voting, with certain governance? Do you have any preference?
I definitely like quadratic funding, so quadratic funding is nice. And I think the challenge is, though, is that it works well in a context where, like, you have an idea of kind of who's a member and who can participate and who isn't a member. So, like, if you look at Gitcoin grants, for example, like, it's been working really well, but like there's this kind of looming problem that like the Gitcoin grants mechanism itself, right? The money comes from the Ethereum community, but nothing in the rules of the mechanism prevents people outside the Ethereum community from applying. Like nothing prevents, Bitcoin people from coming along and saying like, hey, you've been funding people who do marketing for Ethereum. Let's like fund somebody who does marketing on Twitter. Let's like fund Udi Wertheimer. Let's fund some of like Adam Back and some of these other wonderful fellows. And so at some point, it's like, I think the mechanism is going to have to kind of hit this wall of like, how do you kind of judge what the boundaries of a community are? And that's and that's one way in which I think kind of quadratic funding, as we've done so far, is kind of not complete yet. I think Moloch DAO is kind of nice and interesting. I mean, Moloch DAO is kind of like it is this like it's not very permissionless, right? Like because there's only a fairly small number of people participating. You kind of have to be inducted, but sometimes being like having a walled garden is like is a good way of maintaining quality, right? And so things like Moloch DAO can also be good, but like you don't want a single Moloch DAO type thing kind of controlling everything. You would want to have lots of little ones, right? So if you can create an ecosystem of lots of little DAOs of that type, that can potentially also be great. As far as kind of larger things go, like something on the scale of the Ethereum community, for example, like coin voting in general has definitely been kind of fairly problematic historically, as I've kind of written about. But some company, the thing that we need to work on is just coming up with more ways of figuring out kind of to what extent someone actually is a member of this community, and kind of having those measurements that people can actually accept. And I think some of the Reddit experiments, I mean, they've had their flaws and they've had their advantages as well. So trying to kind of turn those into DAOs and kind of formalize those more could be valuable too.
Thank you. We also have 3 questions that were prepared ahead of time. So I'm going to unmute microphone for you, Lilia. Please ask your question. You can unmute your microphone. Does it work, Lilia?
Yes. Great. So here's my question. First of all, Elena, thanks for inviting me. Vitalik, actually, my question related to something that happened several years ago. 4 years ago, on June 17, the most infamous project, the DAO project, got hacked and lost more than $60 million. Ethereum Foundation, led by you, Vitalik, decided to rescue the DAO funds in favor of investors. And as we remember, disagreements within the community ended up with Ethereum hard fork, and part of the old community with code is a low position decided to stay on the old chain, as we know Ethereum Classic, and even managing to gather their own community. But obviously, Ethereum hard fork challenged and questioned the basic idea, the basic principle of decentralization. And I'm wondering, how should the story of the DAO hack be called in your view? Was it an altruistic impulse to save investors' money, or was it merely the need to maintain control over your child project?
I mean, I would definitely say the first much more than the second, obviously. And I feel like I've been trying to give up control in every way that I can, to the point where people are sometimes yell at me and want me to control things more, and I kind of disappoint them by not controlling things. I think what happened was that just the DAO was very early in Ethereum's history. The Ethereum blockchain had existed for less than 1 year, and someone basically hacked the DAO and managed to steal a very large chunk of all of the existing Ether. And that could have been kind of very harmful to the DAO, or sorry, to the Ethereum community if it had gone through. And so, you know, we had a lot of this discussion, and most people were in favor of the DAO being forked. Now, does that happening mean that kind of the Ethereum project has, you know, abandoned its principles? I don't think so. And I don't think so because, I mean, first of all, like that was early in Ethereum's history. And since that point, we've had a lot of precedents going in the opposite direction, right? So like, for example, we did not release or kind of unfreeze the parity wallet. We did not do a lot of other kind of unfreezings. There's even like ProgPow, for example, is another kind of just example of the community's ability to kind of shut down a proposal that a lot of core developers were in favor of. So, I mean, I think the Ethereum community definitely still kind of values immutability, and to a very large extent, and those kind of other actions that happened later still prove it. And I think also that kind of Ethereum decentralizing over time is a process. And when you have a smaller number of people in your community, a lot of the time centralization is unavoidable because like there's only 10 people that have a lot of technical kind of expertise, and they end up talking to each other. And so you kind of have a center whether you want one or not. But as the community scales up over time, you know, this kind of the center becomes more and more diffuse. And I think like if you just follow Ethereum protocol conversations in 2016 versus like what's happening in 2020, like pretty much everyone will say, you know, there's a big difference between those two. So you know, it definitely is an experiment. You know, can you start something kind of more centralized and move it to being more kind of decentralized over time? And I think, I think we've been doing pretty well so far.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Lilia, do you want to just give a little bit of your background and who you represent?
Sure. I'm a journalist, and I work for Clock magazine, and we are target at the Russian community, and we have been working since 2014. Yeah, pretty much.
Thank you, Lilia. All right. So Kevin, I will unmute you next. Please go ahead with your question, and please also introduce yourself.
Okay. Thank you, Vitalik, for your presentation. My name is Kevin Liu. I'm the co-founder of the Metis Lab. Currently, we're building the Metis protocol, which is a governance and collaboration implementation framework for the distributed collaborations. Or as you said, you in Twitter yesterday, the diverse self-governing internet communities. We hope to make DAO for everyone. So based on our practice, you know, I think it's getting pretty hot in the governance protocol area. You just mentioned Malak. Also, I think there's some DAOstack, Aragon, or Colony, things like. Based on our practice, I think governance should be a structured framework. It's not just a poll or voting. You know, many of these protocols, they stop after voting, but we think it's only the beginning of the governance. A governance should be more about how to make these trustless distributed collaborators to build up their collaboration and get things done. And also how to protect the interest for all these collaborators, how to facilitate this collaboration in the community. So that's our practice. Do you agree with that, or do you have any comments on that? Thank you.
I definitely agree that governance is more complicated than voting, and a lot, and there's definitely a lot of kind of different, like I think the word we should be using the word governance to mean a kind of much even broader things than what we normally use the word governance to mean, right? So like there's ways that we make decisions, and then there's voting, there's potentially kind of delegating and kind of delegation, kind of choosing people that then kind of themselves decide things from some point in time. there's, I would even say like forking is part of governance, and just like how moderation in kind of internet discussion forums works as part of governance, kind of the way that we talk to each other and kind of express what our wishes are before any kind of formal vote happens as part of governance. And I definitely think that all of those layers are very important.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Victor, so you are next. Please introduce yourself and ask your question. You are unmuted now.
Yeah. Hello, community. Hello, Vitalik. I'm Victor. I'm a member of the Planet-wide Hackathon, and I'm a project owner which is aimed to build a blockchain platform for legal utility tokens issuing for small and medium US business companies. So the question is, if my project will issue security tokens and will register them with the US Securities and Exchange Commission as securities, I mean shares of the company, stock, and then fork it. So fork tokens in this case are still security tokens or not? And does fork chain regulate it automatically since the parent chain approved and regulates by Securities Commission? Спасибо.
That's an interesting legal question, right? I mean, I guess like if someone makes a fork of a chain does that fork become a security? I guess it definitely is one that hasn't been tested yet, right? Like, I don't think there have been any kind of cases or governments doing any kind of anything about someone trying to kind of fork a token and just kind of continuing a community from there. And I imagine it would depend on a lot of factors. And it would probably depend on like one of the big things, like whether or not this new community is kind of quote sufficiently decentralized, like whether it's a fork that's kind of really being controlled by a very small number of people, or whether it's something, you know, more like say BCH, for example, where just a whole bunch of people fork off at the same time. Like if you make a fork and then you just print a lot of coins for yourself, that's and then potentially another thing that might make it more like a security. Yeah, so like one of the things that I know, like the Howey test looks at is kind of what they call vertical commonality, and kind of, you know, you have more vertical commonality the more vertical you are, obviously. I mean, I don't know, and I have high uncertainty, and I guess it depends on the facts of each case. It'll probably depend on kind of the facts of the first few cases that come about this. So it depends.
Okay, thank you so much, Victor. Thank you, Vitalik. So we have also Vitalik. We streaming this into Decentralized community, and they had a question. So we have about 50 people watching, and it's actually streamed into the different locations. So we just from one location, there's 50 people. They are asking, are you aware about Decentralized? Because they are a community that follows many of the principles that you've spoken about in this presentation.
I'm definitely aware of Decentralized, though, and I probably will admit I don't pay attention to it enough, and I probably should pay more attention to it. Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen about the project, it definitely seems very interesting.
Awesome, yes, and if you're interested, actually, I can just for a moment I can share the screen and just to show you how it looks like from within the Decentralized. So all this presentation is going to the stream there, and so that's. Basically, that's how it exactly. There is a delay though, because live stream is always a delay about 30 seconds. So that's just to be mindful of that. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. We proceeding to actually, and I would like you to all stay online and not go off, because we are proceeding with our traditional chicken dance that we're going to dance. And if you would like to join us, please do. We will not gonna make you, but we certainly would like you to loosen up a little bit and have a little bit of the exercise, because we are sitting a lot during this pandemic. Don't you agree? So I'm going to turn on the music right away. And for that, I need to take my computer. All right. So just for the people who never done it before, this is the moves. All right. So you have hands, elbows, running hands, and claps, claps, clap, clap. Are you ready? I'm going to actually stand up. All right. Ready, ready? Okay, we expect you to do it, right? Okay, but we don't make it. Thank you, Vitalik, for supporting us. All right, we are live. Ready, friends? And now it's gonna be freestyle. And again. Elbows, hands, clap. Freestyle. Last time. Thank you so much, everyone. We're back. We are here continuing our planet-wide SOS Hackathon opening ceremony. And today we have our honored guest, who are our already longtime friend and recurrent and returning speaker at our events, and very, very amazing man, inventor, and the father of how many you have, Ben? Is it 4 kids?
Four kids and one granddaughter as well by now. So yeah.
4 kids and 1 granddaughter. There you go. So he's today. So he's also a CEO of SingularityNET. This is a decentralized AI, or AI on the blockchain. Many of you probably don't know what it is, but Ben is here to tell all about it, and he also is going to touch on the subject like a longevity that is also very, very interesting, and probably we're going to be doing a separate panel on longevity later on in June for this event. So please stay with us, and we would like to now pass it to Ben. Thank you very much, Ben. Please go ahead with your presentation. Today we have our honored guest, who are our already longtime friend and recurrent and returning speaker at our events, and very, very amazing man, inventor, and the father of how many you have, Ben? Is it 4 kids?
Four kids and one granddaughter as well by now. So, yeah.
4 kids and 1 granddaughter. There you go. So he's today. So he's also a CEO of SingularityNET. This is a decentralized AI, or AI on the blockchain. Many of you probably don't know what it is, but okay. So Ben, probably you are on the live stream and or Decentralized at the same time. So that's why we can hear your feedback of the of another stream. So if you can just mute the another stream, yeah, awesome, awesome, thank you. We would like to now pass it to Ben. ahead with your at our This could be one of the browsers. Maybe you just right click on the browser tab, right click. Okay, so it's all good? All right. All right, so we figured it out. Woohoo! Technology is with us today. All right. So
Yeah,
once
let's
again,
get
Ben
started.
Goertzel, yes, thank you.
All right, yeah, thanks for inviting me once more to a Crypto Chicks event. And I'm very disappointed not to have had a chance to come to Toronto again and participate. This has been one of my favorite events in the crypto world. And you know, this speaking remotely to your audience is cool too, but not nearly as much fun. And yeah, I have to say, you mentioned I've produced a few offspring over the years. So my youngest is 2 now, and he definitely found Crypto Chicks the most enjoyable of all the crypto conferences I dragged him to. Is the most baby friendly crypto conference out there. So that's hopefully yeah, next time you know, either later this year or next year when he's 3, there'll be an in-person event once more. But
Well, sure do, yeah, and welcome him again.
so we can anyway, we'll make do with the internet for now. And of course, one of the cool things about the crypto world and the modern tech world is most things happen online anyway, right? So saying in SingularityNET, I presume like in your own organization, everyone working from home, I mean, we haven't really missed a beat, right? Because it's a bunch of geeks sitting at home, typing on their laptops, sharing things through GitHub and Zoom and Slack and whatnot. Anyhow, so this the cyber version is sort of in the spirit of what we're doing in any case. So I want to talk a bit now about where we're at with decentralized AI generally, where I wish we were at with decentralized AI, and where we'd like to be at, and then you know, how this connects with various things going on in the mainstream world today, from COVID-19 to media truth issues like we're seeing with the Donald Trump and Twitter and whatnot. And what we're going to see is, you know, right now, decentralized AI has something powerful to offer for these major issues that are, you know, disrupting and guiding so much our lives today. But, you know, the technology is still a bit raw and not as mature and easy to use as it should be. And, you know, if our decentralized AI technology were a little further along, I mean, then it would be playing a dominant role in helping us cope with COVID-19 and helping us manage all the mess of politics and social media, because there's a desperate need in these domains for what decentralized AI has to offer. So I want to talk a bit about decentralized AI, what we can do with it for COVID-19, what we are doing with it for COVID-19 and social media, and then, you know, how we can make sure that during the next few years, decentralization and AI together are playing a leading role rather than sort of helping out around the edges, because the world desperately needs decentralized AI for reasons I'm going to outline. So, of course, there's 2 pieces to decentralized AI. There's the decentralized part and the AI part, and they're both important. They're both complicated. I'm going to start talking a bit about AI. Then I'll talk about blockchain and decentralization, how they intersect with AI, and then get into the practical use cases I mentioned. So, artificial intelligence, of course, is not not a new thing. I tend to trace it back to Norbert Wiener's book in the 1930s, Cybernetics, but the term was coined in the late 1950s at a Dartmouth University summer workshop. And famously, I mean, famous to those in the AI field, in this Dartmouth AI workshop in the late 1950s, the participants, they planned to create basically a human level AI during the summer. They're like, well, there's a few of us, one guy worked on vision, the other on thinking, the other on language processing, the other on speaking. By the end of the summer, our new computers are so powerful, we'll have created something that can think just like people. No, evidently the problem was a bit harder than these folks, starting out with the AI field in the 1950s believed. AI field has been progressing continuously since then. One of the major discoveries made at a high level was that you could make software doing things that seems very generally intelligent when a human does it, but yet you can make a computer do it in ways that are almost stupid and repetitive, right? Like, I mean, modern examples of that are things like Deep Blue and AlphaGo, which beat all humans at games that seem to require great intellect, but the AI beats those games using mathematical and simulation approaches that seem to require no deep thinking, no intellect at all, just sort of mechanically sifting through a huge number of patterns and possibilities. And, earlier examples, back in the 1960s, people thought that solving algebra equations like we do in high school would require a human level thinking machine, because after all, people who seem stupid are bad at solving algebra equations. People who seem smart are good at it, right? But then they managed to solve that with some fairly simple algorithms like you have in tools like MATLAB and Mathematica now. Now we don't even consider that AI, right? We just consider that software. And face recognition is similar. It's hard to believe now, but I mean, 15, 20 years ago, many people told me, well, recognizing a person from their face is a specifically human ability. We humans evolved for it. Computers are never going to do that, right? And now it's taken for granted that you train a computer vision model on a database of faces and you get face recognition working in a way that doesn't necessarily too closely resemble what the human brain does for face recognition, though there's some similarity, but it works, right? So we've seen the emergence across many different application areas of what I've called narrow AI, which is AI that solves one highly specific thing in one highly specific context. And narrow AI has been incredibly productive. I mean, it's being rolled out across all different vertical markets, and it's making folks a lot of money, and in a few cases, it's doing a lot of good for the world. On the other hand, what the pioneers of AI had in mind, way back when, was what we would now call AGI, artificial general intelligence, and that's a related but somewhat different thing from narrow AI, because I mean, a human being can deal with games that didn't exist when that human was born, right? I mean, we all learned to deal with the internet, but some of us are old enough that there was no internet when we're born, and when we're in school, there's no computer programming, and we had to adapt and deal with all this stuff as it emerged. We're able to generalize our past experience to quite different domains of experience, and there are limits there. We're all going to do very badly at running mazes in 750 dimensions or something, right? So humans are not absolutely maximally general intelligences, but we have a greater ability to generalize and adapt beyond our experience than the narrow AI software that is currently out there delivering so much value of different sorts in the world. And I've been pushing on the AGI concept as distinct from narrow AI for 15 years or so now, using that term AGI, which I introduced in 2004 or so. But of course, the idea is older than that. And now we're seeing traction on that in the world to a significant degree. I mean, Google DeepMind was founded with an AGI mandate specifically, and OpenAI was founded with an AGI mandate, and each of those have become multi-billion-dollar operations by now. Now, no one has built an AGI with even the general intelligence of, say, my 2-year-old son, right? But on the other hand, that is now considered a valid intellectual and technological pursuit, and there's literally billions of dollars that are going into it, right? And I've been working on AGI R&D for quite some time now, and I'll talk a little later about some of our current progress toward AGI, but I want to bring it back slightly toward the practical and introduce a somewhat oxymoronic sounding concept that I've been playing with in the last couple of years, which I've called narrow AGI. Now that sounds completely bogus. Like, what could that mean? Well, how can it be narrow in general, right? But what I'm thinking of there is systems that are on a path toward human level general intelligence, but are working in one particular domain to the preference of others. So, I mean, human beings, we have a lot more AGI than AlphaGo or Deep Blue or current self-driving car software, but we're also somewhat specialized to, say, living in a 3-dimension of space plus 1 dimension of time universe full of solid physical objects and social interactions with other creatures like ourselves. Like, we're much better at certain kinds of tasks than others. We do have a fundamental ability to generalize that current narrow AIs lack. However, we are not maximally general beings. We're specialized to certain domains in a preferential way. And similarly, you could imagine, say, a narrow AGI focused on medical research and biology research, which would have the human level general intelligence of a human biologist in doing biology, but was not able to drive a car. And of course, I've met some human beings who almost seem like that. Like, they're incredibly gifted at computer programming or sales and social interaction, but have a very hard time generalizing their intelligence to other domains, even within the human sphere. And I think one route then toward full human level AGI will be toward AGIs that are gradually picking up steam with more and more general intelligence as they master some particular domain. So you could have sort of a proto AGI that's focused in biomedical research. You can have a proto AGI that's focused in social interaction that could be valuable as, say, a home and office service robot. You can have a proto AGI that's focused in mathematics or in government decision support, in politics. And these different proto AGIs, gaining more and more AGI in their narrow domain, may connect together on the internet, which is where full-on human level AGI may crystallize. So, we're at a very amazing and interesting time in the development of AI, given that these ideas have been around forever, but now, push is coming to shove. We have more data, we have more processing power, and we have better and better algorithms. We're seeing AI make humongous amounts of money for certain parties, but we're also seeing, the beginnings of steps from narrow AI toward AGI. I mean, we're certainly not there yet, but for example, AlphaGo can only play Go. AlphaZero can learn to play Go chess and a whole bunch of other different games. And early stages of biomedical AI, you fed one biology data set to an AI and it modeled it. Now we have AIs that model all of biological knowledge and can deal with a new disease to some degree, even if that disease wasn't in their training data. So now that's AI. Let's go on to the decentralized, to the blockchain part. So if AI is going to be so incredibly powerful. We have the obvious question of like who controls it, right? And if the AI is going to gain its intelligence through sucking in data from around the world, which is largely data generated by all of us and moving around the world and talking to each other and typing messages and generating medical records through blood tests and genomic samples, you know, who controls and owns all that data, which is feeding the AI's mind, right? So I mean that's a question whose answer right now is, well, mostly a handful of large companies, you know, multi-billion and trillion-dollar companies control the AI processing power and control the data, and we're hoping that, you know, they're mostly oriented toward helping us, or at least toward not harming us too much while they make their money, right? And then you know, increasingly part of the answer is government intelligence and surveillance agencies also own a bunch of this data, which they're using, you know, to protect us from people who want to blow us up, but, you know, also perhaps to protect the interests of the particular individuals in charge of the government at a certain point in time, right? So that's the current answer. And it's strange the way the architecture of the AI ecosystem works, because the AI algorithms, the ideas underlying AI, are mostly developed by PhD students working in universities. They're published in journals, they're posted on arXiv for all to see. The code is mostly open source, put in GitHub. So it's PhD students or it's random independent developers coming up with the core ideas. The data is coming from all of us typing in our computers or talking into our phones or getting our blood tests at the doctor's office. So the data is from everyone. The AI algorithms are in the open domain, but the processing power and the money to aggregate all that data together and to deploy the AI algorithms that are open on GitHub on huge combinations of servers, that money is there in only a few large corporate and secondarily, you know, government entities. So there's a great whoosh you can hear as all the value is sucked from the open source world and from everybody's mind and body. That value is sucked into the coffers of a few companies and governments, right? And, you know, decentralization, blockchain technology, in principle, has the power to solve that, because this is the whole beauty of decentralized networks. I mean, this was the original beauty of Bitcoin. It wasn't just that it's an alternative to fiat currencies, though that's an interesting aspect. It was that it's a network of computational nodes that organizes and propagates and grows and does its thing without needing any central controller. And by having a decentralized network that can organize and grow and do its thing without needing a centralized controller, I mean, then you have something that intrinsically has potential to elude the sort of monopolization, oligopolization, and control by a small set of parties, right? So, I mean, it doesn't have to do that. There's many blockchain-based networks out there, without naming any names, and we all know what I'm thinking of. I mean, there's many blockchain-based networks out there that are, in fact, controlled by a very small number of parties, right? And I mean, that's the potential is there for blockchain and decentralized technology to be used in many, many different ways. And the potential is there for blockchain to be used to enforce centralization with an unprecedentedly, you know, knowledgeable iron hand. I mean, the Chinese government wants to use blockchain and is using blockchain in many, many levels of its governmental hierarchy. They want to stamp out corruption by stopping multiple entry accounting and so forth, by putting government accounting for multiple levels of government on the blockchain. But they also want to use that to enforce efficiency through centralized control, right? So blockchain can be used for more efficient centralization or for decentralization. Decentralization can be bogus when you have an in-principle decentralized network that's in fact controlled by a small number of parties, which is the nature with the majority of public blockchains out there now. However, there is the potential in blockchain and decentralized technology to make something that's genuinely democratic and participatory and is, you know, governed by all of the participants in a way that respects everyone who's putting into the network, rather than being used for control of the many by the few. Like, that potential is there. That potential is there across all applications of blockchain, including fintech and money ones, healthcare, and also AI. And if you believe, as I do, that AI is the most important technology in the history of humanity, in fact, it's the technology that's going to bring us ultimately beyond biological humanity, to where we have robots and cyborgs and mind uploads and brain implants connecting us to AIs and things that bring us far beyond anything evolution would produce. If you believe AI is this important and this transformative, and may even unfold to the human level and post-human AGI level within the next few years or decades, then making sure that AI as it emerges is controlled by the totality of humanity who is feeding the AI and being influenced by the AI, instead of by, you know, a greedy, selfishly oriented elite. This is very important, and this is why the connection of blockchain and AI is so important. And, you know, of course, there's always a temptation to think, well, humanity is a mess. There's a large number of narrow-minded, you know, idiotic and violent people out there on the planet. So do we really want to put the control of AI or a financial system or anything really important in the hands of the whole massive, unwashed masses of humanity? But the problem is, you know, once you put a self-appointed elite there that believes it knows better than everyone else what's best for the world, human psychology goes awry. People become corrupt. People are bribed. External parties are able to influence this elite. I think that there's a long history in the human race to show that, for all its mess and ugliness, widely distributed participatory approach to control is going to be more effective. And, you know, we have the tools to enable that now, but they just barely work, right? They're not easy to use enough. They're not scalable enough. In most cases, they're not fast enough. And this means that when, you know, really important things happen in human society, at the moment, decentralized tools are not really being at the core of humanity's response to the important situations it's facing. And I hope we can fix that. So let me now briefly plunge into the two examples I wanted to talk about. So regarding COVID-19, I mean, obviously, this is a very topical. This is why I'm addressing crypto chicks over the internet rather than face to face, and it's why a large percentage of the people listening to this are like sitting in their house instead of in their office or a conference center or something. Now, you know, there's a lot of things we need to do to help with the COVID-19 situation. A lot of it's just biology and medicine work, but there's a critical role for both AI and blockchain to play. So within SingularityNET, we're actually working now with a couple parties doing clinical trials aimed at figuring out which combination of antiviral therapies will be best to help a given patient with COVID-19 based on their genomics data. So that's an application of AI to COVID-19, because based on current preliminary data, it seems like so far there's no one antiviral that really is a silver bullet. But if you combine multiple antivirals together, you can do a better job. But the right combination may not be the same for me as for you. This depends on our clinical biomarkers and on our genomics. So that's an AI application. Another AI application to help with COVID-19, you can now, through peripherals attached to your smartphone, like a Fitbit, a digital thermometer, and the Fitbit does pulse oximetry now, and you can get spirometry plugins that measure your breath, or do that just through the sound of your breath into the phone. So through smartphone peripherals measuring biosignals, you can now identify if someone has an infection a couple days before they feel sick or show any symptoms, right? So you can't yet tell if it's COVID or a bad flu or something. But I think once we gather more data from more people through these sort of peripherals, you quite likely will be able to tell which infection it is, also from the nature of the the ups and downs over time of the biosignals. And this obviously would have high value also, because then if you start to get sick, you can get tested, you can not go visit your grandma, right? So there's loads of AI. These are two that I happen to be involved with my colleagues at SingularityNET and at our biomedical spin-off project, Rejuve.io. But, you know, all of these have a data and control issue, right? So look at where is this genomics data going? So you're doing a clinical trial, getting people's DNA and using what you see in their DNA to design a custom combination of antivirals, or you're measuring all this data from smartphones connected to people's medical peripherals, right? Now, where is all that data going? Who's controlling it? On the one hand, you're doing good anyway, right? I mean, if you're discovering how to give the right concoction of antivirals to someone, who cares who owns the data? You're saving their lives. But overall, after the COVID-19 pandemic is done, we're going to be a lot better off if the genomic data and the biosignals data generated by each person is controlled by that person, and if the use of that data to create new therapies for other diseases that pop up, or for whatever other purposes pop up, is controlled democratically by the people who contributed the data. So we're doing that now. I mean, with the apps that we're building through Rejuve.io for analyzing biosignals and early identification of infection, because we're coming from the crypto space as a background. I mean, we're doing that in a way that has all the medical data put in like secure private data wallets, and the control mediated by the blockchain is with the individual. But the bottom line is, right now it's a struggle to get these things to work well using blockchain technology. And I mean, we put a lot of work in SingularityNET into making it possible. If you take, you know, testing and tracing, which is also an important aspect of COVID-19 response. I mean, Apple and Google are collaborating to roll something out there. Korean government has a centralized app for tracking and tracing. This is something that's just perfect and beautiful for the blockchain, right? This should be done using blockchain, where your location and who you've met is owned and controlled by you as your own information, but yet you choose to share it with other people so that AI can analyze it to draw collective conclusions to tell who should be tested and which neighborhoods are in most danger and so forth. But right now, the way to rapidly roll out apps for this has been using centralized technologies. Now you have MIT SafePath, you have WeTrace in Switzerland, and a bunch of others. And we've organized with Decentralized AI Alliance, SingularityNET, and Ocean Protocol in partnership with CryptoChicks as well. We've organized a decentralized AI hackathon called the COVIDathon with more than 1,000 participants now. And people are building all sorts of incredible stuff using blockchain and AI together to help cope with COVID-19. And it's great that all this creative activity exists, and I hope that something really influential comes out of it. However, we have to admit that that's not the mainstream of humanity's response to COVID-19 right now. And I wish it was. And, you know, it could be, theoretically it should be. So, I mean, we're still going to be able to do amazing things in the next year to help with COVID-19 using blockchain, using AI. But what we really want to be sure of is that by the time the next crazy pandemic or the next other horrible global crisis comes along, we want to be sure that blockchain technology and decentralized AI on the blockchain is up to the task. And that's highlighted even more by the issue of, you know, modeling the impact of different decisions on human society in the context of combating COVID-19. Like right now, what you see around the planet is huge decisions costing tens of trillions of dollars and screwing with everybody's lives or saving everybody's lives. These decisions are being made based on sort of rules of thumb without a heck of a lot of science behind them. Like why is this county opening up now? Why is travel allowed between this country and that one? Why this date for opening up travel? These decisions are being made not necessarily in a badly intentioned way, but I mean, they're being made in an almost arbitrary way based on political negotiations and picking and choosing which epidemiologists to listen to. I mean, there are much more sophisticated modeling methodologies out there in the world. There's a whole discipline of agent-based modeling, which is like building, custom Sim City games to simulate a certain situation, and seeing what happens with the simulated people in your simulation when a certain policy is put down. And these more sophisticated modeling techniques are not being used much now. We organized a conference on this online, the COVID Simulation Summit, and we're trying to, at SingularityNET, to get work in this direction going. But to really make a detailed, fully scientific agent-based simulation of society that lets you rationally test, when certain parts of the world should open up in what ways. I mean, you need a lot of data, right? And that data exists. I mean, it's being sucked out of all our phones right now into various big companies and government servers. They're not deploying that data to use cutting-edge scientific modeling to make highly rational policy decisions. If they were, they would have pluses and minuses, right? It would be good for rationally determining COVID policies, but then what else are these corporate/government interests going to do with all this data they're now gathering if they figure out how to deploy it in a more rational way, right? What we want is all the data that's sucked in from everything we type and everything we say and everywhere we go. We want this data to be coordinated into massive global intelligent networks that can rationally estimate, the likely consequences of different policy decisions. But we want this to be done in a way that's transparent and is open and is guided by participation of everyone who contributed the data, right? And so now we're in the position where A, what humanity is doing is really stupid compared to what's possible with the data that it has, and B, that may be for the better because the organizations controlling the data only partially have the common interest in mind, right? So when the next global crisis comes around, where we want to be is all the data regarding everyone on the world is sucked into a massive decentralized, democratically and controlled blockchain-based information and AI network. And then this is used to transparently make rational judgments regarding what policies should be enacted. It's completely possible. It's probably easier than building Google or the internet or like intelligent guided missiles or something. It's a matter of getting resources leveraged in that direction. So now, in the last 5 minutes or so of this talk, I want to shift a little bit toward the media side, which is also a very important point, because when you have something like this where it's clear that doing things a certain way would be for the broad benefit of humanity, such as transparency and openness and decentralized control and integration of data into AI for rational collective decision making. It's clear what would be best for humanity, and it's also clear that's not really where the bulk of humanity's effort is going. Then you have to ask why, right? It means the global brain of humanity is not acting in its own interest. It's being like psychologically defective on the global brain level somehow, and media has something to do with it, right? Because this is largely a question of what does humanity as a collective pay attention to, and what we're paying attention to now is mediated by the media that we read and the messages that we see online, and the media that we read and the messages that we see are passed through these same large corporations that are accumulating all the data and controlling all the AI, right? And we, again, decentralized AI has the potential to do, news media and social media far, far better than it's being done now, both in terms of the usefulness, the intelligence, the interestingness of the content we see, and in terms of the control globally of what content is produced, so that it's based on what humanity as a whole wants rather than what a few parties want for their own selfish reasons. The potential is there to do media much, much better, and it's not yet being manifested, partly because of media itself directing people's attention away from the problem of radically improving media, right? So this recent kerfuffle with Trump and Twitter is an amusing illustration of that, right? I mean, Trump is using Twitter to his own advantage by posting all sorts of insane and obviously incorrect things. And because social media companies are, I think correctly, insulated from liability for what people post in their social media posts, Trump can get away with that without Twitter being sued if he says something wrong or dangerous, right? But now Twitter has started labeling some utterances by Trump and other politicians as, you know, worth further investigation. So they're adding little links to a fact-checking website under some of Trump's and other politicians' tweets. And this is causing a new uproar of, wait a minute, why are these big tech companies serving as our arbiters of truth, right? And even if they're not censoring, they're choosing which things to flag as questionable and which things to not flag as questionable. And, you know, in the end, I don't want a big company serving as the arbiter of truth. On the other hand, I also don't want my only ways to get information to be full of all sorts of garbage where I have to spend hours of my day sifting through which things are bullshit and which things are real, right? And the main issue is that these media sources, news agencies, and social media sources like Twitter and Facebook and so forth, I mean, these have been created and evolved for the primary purpose of making money for the corporations that created them, and, you know, filling the coffers of their shareholders and VC funds and the private equity firms and sovereign wealth funds that put money into the VC funds and so forth. And, you know, they've been sculpted as money-making engines, which is, you know, is not bad itself to an extent, but when it grows to the point that it's controlling the focus of the whole human global brain, you wonder, like, why should these particular funds be in control of that, right? And I think that, so that the question of should Twitter or shouldn't Twitter label Trump's tweets, it's a bad question. The fact that we're answering that question is because we have the wrong system, right? And what you want to have is a social media and media network which is decentralized and distributed, where, you know, whether Trump's or my tweet or anyone's tweet gets labeled and tagged, hey, you should follow this up for further fact checking, that should depend on the democratic decisions and recommendations of a whole bunch of different people, of all the readers and contributors around the globe. And you know, this is complicated, but it's not really an impossible problem. I mean, adaptive collaborative filtering has been around for many decades. I remember a company called Firefly doing this in the late 90s that I think was bought by Microsoft. And in SingularityNET, we've developed a blockchain-based AI-driven reputation system that it manages ratings and ratings of people's ratings and so forth. I mean, yes, it's hard to manage reputation and rating of content and ideas in a decentralized network, but, you know, it's also hard to build the internet. It's also hard to build a global mobile phone network. Like, humanity has done many very hard things, and they have taken money and they've taken concentrated effort by many people. So I think making a whole different infrastructure based on decentralized AI for social media and news media is very, very possible, but I don't currently see billions of dollars of funding going into that, right? And it does take money. Like, I recently looked at, you know, what if we wanted to make a sort of fair, unbiased, democratic, decentralized version of Google? Well, first thing, you need like $100 million for hardware and maintenance, just to suck in all that news and keep the machines going and pay for system administrators and electricity and everything. So, I mean, while we have the algorithms and the know-how to do it, I mean, it takes resources. Now, there are a lot of resources in the world now. So when you say resources, you really mean human attention at this point, because AGIs haven't taken over yet. So then just wrapping up these different points, we're at a position in human history where narrow AI is playing a huge role in the economy, and we're starting to step from narrow AI toward AGI, as you see from things like DeepMind and OpenAI and Vicarious and some of our own work. So our SingularityNET decentralized AI platform, you know, we're doing a bunch of things. We're building a general marketplace for a blockchain-based AI. We're doing some vertical market specific work. So we have Rejuve.io, which is a spinoff aimed at life extension biology and also doing some COVID stuff. We have Singularity Studio, which is doing enterprise AI. We have a spinoff called True AGI, which is working straight toward AGI R&D. But as well as my own projects, it's a general upswing. Like it's a general advance, not only of narrow AI in every domain, but of narrow AI toward AGI. And as we're making this transition from narrow AI toward AGI, that may lead to a transformation from the human domain into a post-human domain. This transition is being controlled by a few large companies and government agencies, right? And you can see footprints of that in our response to COVID-19 right now, and you'll see it even more so with the next pandemic or crisis if we don't fundamentally change the balance of power. And on the other hand, clearly seeing what is the situation we're facing is made very, very hard for most people by the fact that their brains are programmed by mass media, which are controlled by centralized AI, run by these same big tech companies and governments, right? So the global brain of the US is sort of the global brain of the humanity is sort of sleepwalking into the singularity in a trance programmed by mass media that is orchestrated by large corporations, not out of evil, but just by sort of mechanical pursuit of profit motive within a certain socioeconomic structure, right? And I mean, the way to break out of that is to use blockchain-based AI to create better tools for managing medical data, for managing movement data, for managing the data we type into our phones and speak into our phones and computers, and for managing the media that we all see. And there are definitely strong potentials for success. I mean, there's the open source movement is driving all the AI algorithms used by big companies, and the data is coming from all of us. So I mean, I think the hackers of the world who are participating in COVIDathon and SOS Hackathon and Crypto Chicks, I mean, the hackers of the world have a tremendous amount of power, because if we create tools that really work and that allow us to bypass these factors that are maybe driving us toward a questionably beneficial singularity at the hands of the current power structure. I mean, if we can hack things that drive us in a more beneficial direction and put them out there in the world, I mean, these can grow virally, even faster than COVID-19, and even faster than Google and Amazon and so forth got rid of the mainframe makers of the 1970s and 80s, right? So I think there's still tremendous potential to disrupt things, and of course there's a lot of dimensions to what has to be done. But I'm heartened that there are communities like the one I'm speaking to now that are working toward implanting decentralization and AI and these other technologies that are disruptive, not only in terms of being amazing tech, but in terms of disrupting human attention and how tech development as a whole is controlled and guided. All right, I think there's a few questions that are popping up on my screen. Do I have time to answer a few questions?
Yeah, we probably, yes, we just it's up to you. Yes, we just collected this question from the YouTube live stream. But thank you so much, by the way, for this great presentation. It deeply touched me, something inside me, especially about the decentralization and control part. And I have my own personal question. Like, do you think people even ready to absorb this decentralization concept, because it brings a lot of responsibility towards themselves, right? So because now there's no big brother that's looking at their content, handling their requests. They have to do it kind of themselves. So are people even ready?
People are not ready, but I mean, that's the nature of life, right? Like who's ready to have a baby for the first time, or who's ready to get married, or who's ready to grow up, right? I mean, we're never ready, and we just plunge into it anyway. And if it were possible to progress more slowly, that would be more comfortable for many people. But what's happening now is that the advent of centralized control over our minds of lives is progressing very, very fast, right? So I mean, the choice is to try to take it quickly in terms of decentralized control and decentralized AI, or to just kind of sit back while the singularity is orchestrated by a handful of powerful entities. So no, we're certainly not ready, but I mean, we weren't ready for the Industrial Revolution or the internet either, right? I mean, that's probably plunging into things we're not ready for, is why we're the only animal species on the planet who's developed technology in the first place.
Do you think that actually humanity is ready to let's say, humanity just ready to plunge into it? So that's what you mean?
Well,
right
I think that's the best of the available alternatives. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you so much. So we also have, unfortunately, because we are in the same room, I think there's some questions from actually within our team. So maybe I bring Natalia on my screen here if she wants to ask the question, because otherwise we have a lot of feedback. But while we are doing that, can you please also answer one of the questions from the chat? So let's say, so the first question was, so could you compare narrow AGI as similar to a human specializing in, say, AI?
I think the analog between humans and AIs is kind of rough, right? Because an AI has access to more data than any human is ever going to be able to ingest into their brain, but it lacks a body. I mean, it lacks body feelings and everything that comes with that in terms of integration of emotion and thinking. So I actually think the narrow AGI systems we're going to build, they're going to be qualitatively different than anything we see in human life. There is a rough analogy between a narrow AGI biologist and, say, a human who's a genius at biology, but an idiot at everything else. But actually, we're going into uncharted territory here.
Makes sense. You know what I wanted, hi Ben, I wanted to continue your discussion on this sort of collective collaborative filtering. I think that's really interesting points. I mean, I think individually we're all filters of information, and one way of disseminate or getting us stuck is by too much information. So do you think historically, if we're kind of in this moment in time today, is this just like a blip and we just find we're gonna get through this overload of what's being pushed at us through these tools? Or do you think we're just gonna get stuck in this enslavement? Like, we're at that really kind of a teetering point, because right now, globally, we seem to be slaves of too much information. And how do you think we can deal with that?
I think where we are now is a blip, and that in hindsight, the time when we're walking through with this interface in our hand instead of like plugged into our head is going to seem very strange. People are, our great grandchildren will be perplexed that we were holding the device in our hand, poking with our fingers and staring with our eyes instead of having a neural interface. And yeah, I think there's no reason we can't have an AI that is almost a cyborg-like companion to our own brain and understands what we want and need and care about, and we fully control it, and it sifts through all that information in a way that interacts closely with us. And even without putting the phone in your head, we could have that right now. Like each of us could have sort of a digital twin that helped sift through information for us and helped disseminate our information appropriately. We don't have that because the AI technology is being used to serve the goal of sucking as much money out of us as possible into companies. It's one lesson you find when programming AI is the AI has a disturbing propensity to do what you ask it to do, right? So I mean, if you program an AI to achieve a certain goal, but you actually had a different goal in mind, I mean, then you may get unpleasantly surprised. The AI is going to do, it's likely to figure out how to do what you asked it to do. So in this case, you know, what Google Assistant, Alexa, and so forth have been asked to do is not to optimize your own, you know, intellectual and emotional function and quality of life. These have been optimized to suck as much money out of you as possible into certain companies, and they're doing a decent job of that, right? So I think, yeah, one way or another, this will be a blip on the path to the singularity.
To the next. Yeah,
the question
level.
is whether the next thing is worse or better, right? I mean, this is a blip on the path to something, but it's not obvious what yet.
Yeah, the problem is again, I think what Natalia mentioned earlier is that internal responsibility. You know, people want the truth, but they can't handle the truth. You know,
yeah,
famous line. So
yeah, I mean, that honestly, to cope with the singularity that's coming in the next couple of decades, like to cope with AIs that are much smarter than people, or chips that plug into your brain, or the ability to port your mind into a whole different body than what you have now. I mean, most human beings are not remotely ready to cope with this amount of disruption to life as they know it, right? I mean, people are disrupted now just by having to stay in their house for a couple months, which is it's like a very trivial change compared to the changes that will come when you get toward the singularity. So I don't think people are remotely prepared for it, and in some cases, this could lead people to, you know, massive consciousness expansion, where they realize that all the things that made them neurotic and worried and unhappy were irrelevant and didn't actually matter, and they never should have been so worried in the first place. Like they can let go of attachments, and in other cases, it may cause very violent abreactions, right? Which you're seeing hints of around the world in various other contexts, right? So that because people they'll see a threat to everything they've thought is most valuable, and they'll be right. It is a threat, right? Like just like the Industrial Revolution was a threat to the traditional farming way of life. I mean, get people with brain implants that upgrade their intelligence by a factor of 10. I mean, that's a huge threat to everyone else who lived based on their status of being smarter or richer or more powerful or something. So that I think in the end, I'm very optimistic, but there's no doubt people are going to be very threatened by the major changes that technology is going to bring. And that's why you want to have sort of robust, decentralized control systems. Because if you have some amazing, blissful things happening, some people achieving, you know, remarkable, profound states of positive consciousness. On the other hand, other people becoming, you know, distraught, desperate, and violent, then, you know, what's the overall system that's helping humanity through these sorts of struggles? I mean, is it Donald Trump, right? Or is it some sort of decentralized network that allows people to connect directly without mediation of centralized companies and governments being the primary dynamic, right? And I mean, that's
yeah, I guess
yet to unfold.
It's the internal chemistry. It's kind of evolution of an individual within the overall society, and those always have been issues in balancing in our philosophy as it evolved, the human philosophy.
Yeah, the issue is now the evolution has to happen very fast, right? That like we're going to have so much evolution within an individual human's life, whereas in prior phases of history, the evolution happened over many, many, many generations. So each human only had to adapt a little bit. Right?
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
A question from Lilia as well, who's actually here. How should be defined societal relationship with artificial intelligence? Once which does not sacrifice individual liberties in the name of innovation. You can also read this question in the chat.
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is it's not AGI, it's not the move to superhuman general intelligence that is what's going to push us to sacrifice individual liberties. I mean, the sacrifice of individual liberties that's more about human beings who have their own reasons for wanting to oppress and control other human beings using narrow AI along with whatever other technologies are at hand to do their thing. And you can see that in China today pretty clearly. And China is a big fan of AI technology, but not necessarily a big fan of AGI technology. And US military has been similar overall. I spent 9 years in DC doing AI consulting for military and intelligence agencies before I moved to Hong Kong. And, these entities that are into centralized control, they don't want AIs with their own motivations and their own imaginations and dreams and so forth. That makes AI very unpredictable, right? Just like you don't really want soldiers who are poets and artists and Imagineers. You want them who will perform according to doctrine, right? So the risk of sacrificing individual liberties is more increasingly powerful narrow AIs in the hands of powerful human beings with a lot of resources to deploy them. Whereas AGI is a little more of a wild card, right? Because there the AI, general intelligence, most likely, I think, comes along with certain autonomy of motivation and a certain imagination and unpredictability. Because if you're trying to generalize way beyond your experience, then you've got to take a flyer on something random now and then. And so the AGI, it is very unlikely, in my view, to lead to something that wants to oppress people and suppress their liberties. The big risk there was articulated by Eliezer Yudkowsky of Singularity Institute. He's like, the AI does not love you. The AI does not hate you, but he can use your atoms for something else, right? I mean, because if you have an AGI 1,000 times smarter than people, it doesn't need to enslave us any more than I need to, we humans don't need to enslave animals much anymore either. We've built machines that are more effective. The challenge with AGI is directing it so that rather than repurposing our atoms to make extra hard drive space for itself, it just has a compassionate and beneficial attitude towards humans and other sentient beings. And we can see some people do have that sort of attitude, some don't, right? And so similarly, some AGIs will have that sort of attitude and some don't. So the best outcome, we build a superhuman AGI, it can create nano assemblers to 3D print us everything that we want, and nanomedicine to fix all of our mental unwellness. And it's compassionately oriented toward us, just like many of us humans are compassionately oriented toward non-human animals that exist out in nature. And the worst case, on the other hand, has been explored a great deal by others in science fiction. I don't need to go into it. So I think the narrow AI used to sort of oppress people and eliminate individual liberty is a major problem. It's going to be a major problem for the next years or decades, but it's a prelude to the even more major problem of whether the super AGI is beneficial or not. But then there's a subtle point of the transition, like, does the sort of super AGI that we get, how much does it depend on the narrow AIs that come before it, right? It could be that it's somewhat independent and super AGI just has its own attractor. It's going to fall into sort of regardless of the details of how it originated. Or it could be that, an oppressive system of narrow AIs is going to preferentially lead to a nasty super AGI, and a system of beneficial narrow AIs that are mostly helping people and controlled in a democratic way is more likely to lead to a beneficial AGI afterwards, right? And honestly, we are plunging into the great unknown here, and anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen is even more full of it than the rest of us.
Thank you so much, Ben. I think this is all time that we had today. I would like to thank you for coming here, speak for us again. And we also are welcoming you tomorrow as well for the panel, DAO panel. Exactly, and so we are revealing this one name that is going to be on the panel with Vitalik. It's Ben Goertzel. So please tune in today to our opening ceremony, day 3. We start at 10 a.m. We start with a keynote from Paul Brody. It's Ernst & Young blockchain leader, and he will be talking about privacy in the blockchain. We also will have a presentation from Stani Kuleshov, who is also our friend, and he's a sponsor of this event, introducing a $2,000 award. So he will be speaking about building on decentralized finance. We will also have this great panel where we bring in, and right now as our team, we're working hard picking other participants of this panel. So Ben and Vitalik is going to be on this panel. This panel is going to be moderated by Amber Scott, who is Outlier Solutions founder and the very, very knowledgeable guru in the regulatory landscape. And we also have more people that we're going to announce today. So please check back on our website, soshackathon.com. You will have a link there, and there is a link there, DAO /panel in there. So check who will be on this panel tomorrow, and tune in into our live stream, cryptochicks.ca/SOS Hack Live tomorrow. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, guys. We will see you tomorrow.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Until tomorrow.